They carved the roads of a growing nation. Pure steel, chrome, and American grit. This is the legacy of the American pickup. From the tiny to the towering, these are the strangest trucks ever built. Bizarre engineering and wild designs that look almost unreal. Well,
behold the weirdest trucks ever built. From bulging hoods to tracks to circular beds that make no sense if monster wheels and wedge-shaped lines to completely off-center cabs.
The 1948 Studebaker M5 pickup looked like a truck that couldn't decide what it wanted to be. It had the job of a serious work machine, but the appearance of something assembled from leftover ideas. The front end was tall and unusually narrow, the grille looked oversized, and the cab had a boxy shape that made it feel more like a small farm building on wheels than a proper American pickup. At a time when American trucks were becoming symbols of strength and reliability, the M5 arrived with a design that made many buyers stop and stare. Not because it looked powerful, because it looked strange. Here's the surprising part. The Studebaker M5 was actually one of the first post-war pickups designed with a stronger focus on driver visibility and passenger car comfort. The truck looked awkward, but some of its ideas were more modern than its appearance suggested. Underneath the unusual styling, Studebaker was trying to move the pickup truck into a new era. The company wanted something different from the traditional formula of a simple box on a frame. The M5 used smoother body lines and a more integrated design, borrowing ideas from passenger cars. But the problem was that truck buyers in the late 1940s were not looking for style experiments. They wanted something that looked tough. For many farmers and workers, a truck was not supposed to look elegant or futuristic. It was supposed to look like it could survive years of abuse. And the M5 had a difficult time convincing people. The cabin especially created mixed reactions. The tall body and upright seating position gave it a unique appearance, but the interior still felt basic and work-focused. Comfort was improved compared with some older trucks, but it was far from modern. The driving experience also showed the limits of its era. The steering was heavy, the suspension was built for carrying loads rather than smooth cruising, and the ride could become tiring on rough roads. This was a truck designed for getting the job done, not for making the driver feel relaxed. The engine was reliable, but it wasn't exactly exciting. The M5 used Studebaker's proven 6-cylinder power, which was strong enough for normal work, but struggled when pushed with heavy cargo. When the bed was loaded, the truck reminded you that it was built for patience, not speed. Imagine buying a brand new truck in 1948 and realizing the biggest complaint wasn't that it was unreliable, it was that people thought it looked too weird. How often does a vehicle fail because of its personality instead of its mechanics? That was the biggest challenge of the Studebaker M5. It wasn't a terrible truck. In fact, mechanically, it was quite capable. It had a strong frame, simple engineering, and enough durability for everyday work. The problem was emotional. Buyers didn't immediately trust something that looked so different. Compared with competitors from Ford and Chevrolet, the M5 struggled because those trucks already had a reputation for being exactly what customers expected. Studebaker was asking buyers to accept a new idea, and in the conservative world of pickups, that was a difficult request. The strange proportions became its signature. The tall nose, the narrow front, the unusual cabin, everything about the M5 made it memorable. But memorable does not always mean successful. Many were used hard and eventually disappeared, which is why surviving examples are surprisingly rare today. Collectors now appreciate the truck precisely because it was different. It represents a moment when Studebaker tried to challenge the traditional pickup formula. The 1948 Studebaker M5 was not the strongest truck, it was not the most comfortable, and it definitely wasn't the prettiest. But it proved something important. Sometimes the strangest vehicles are the ones brave enough to try something new. And even when the world doesn't understand them at first, history sometimes does. The 1958 International Harvester A120 pickup was never designed to charm anyone. It didn't enter the American truck market with a sense of style competition or a desire to follow trends. Instead, it arrived like a machine that had been built in a completely different world, one where aesthetics were irrelevant and durability was the only language that mattered. Built by International Harvester, a company deeply rooted in agricultural equipment, tractors, and industrial machinery, the A120 naturally inherited that philosophy, and you can see it instantly in its design. This is not a truck shaped by designers thinking about proportion, beauty, or visual flow. This is a truck shaped by engineers thinking about stress, load, and survival. The front end is the first thing that hits you. It is blunt, heavy, almost emotionally distant in its appearance. The grille is square, industrial, and completely unapologetic. There is no attempt to soften the face or give it friendliness. Instead, it looks like a piece of factory equipment that somehow escaped onto public roads. The body sits tall, with thick proportions that feel more functional than refined. There is a sense that every panel exists for a reason, and that reason is not style, it is strength. Even the spacing, the edges, and the visual balance of the truck feel more like they were dictated by mechanical necessity than aesthetic choice. And that is exactly why it stands out so strongly today. Because in the late 1950s, the American pickup world was slowly beginning to change. Competitors like Ford Motor Company and General Motors were introducing trucks that started to look more refined. Chrome details were increasing, body shapes were becoming smoother. Even work trucks were beginning to carry a sense of consumer appeal. But International Harvester refused to follow that direction fully. The International Harvester A120 pickup stayed rooted in its industrial identity, and that decision is what makes it look so unusual in hindsight. Because while other trucks were beginning to evolve toward dual-purpose identity, part work machine, part lifestyle vehicle, the A120 remained firmly in the pure tool category. It didn't care if it looked modern, it cared if it survived abuse. The cabin reinforces that same philosophy. When you open the door, there is no illusion of comfort or softness waiting inside. The seating is upright and rigid. The materials are basic and durable. The dashboard is simple, functional, and built for clarity rather than design elegance. Every switch and gauge feels like it was placed for long-term serviceability, not visual appeal. It gives you the impression that the interior was designed for gloves, dirt, and long working days, not relaxed driving. And then you start it, and everything changes from visual judgment to physical experience. The steering is heavy, requiring deliberate effort at low speeds. There is no lightness, no artificial ease. It feels mechanical in the purest sense, as if you are directly controlling weight and friction rather than an assisted system. The suspension is equally uncompromising. Built with thick leaf springs and industrial-grade components, it is designed to carry load after load without failure. But that strength comes at a cost. Every road imperfection is transmitted into the chassis, and from the chassis directly into the driver's body. There is no filtering, no softness, no compromise between road and human comfort. It does not absorb the road, it reports it, and sometimes very loudly. In motion, the International Harvester A120 pickup feels less like a consumer vehicle and more like a piece of mobile industrial equipment. It moves, but it never really relaxes. Even at steady speeds, there is a constant sense that the truck is operating under workload conditions, not cruising conditions. This is where the contrast with competitors becomes even more obvious. Ford and GM trucks of the era were slowly moving toward a balance between work capability and driver comfort. They were still rugged, but they were beginning to soften their edges slightly. Ride quality was improving, noise levels were gradually reduced, driving was becoming less physically demanding. But the A120 didn't participate in that evolution. It stayed in its own lane, literally and philosophically. And that is why to modernize, it can look almost goofy. Not because it is weak or poorly made, but because it is so visually and mechanically extreme in its seriousness. It does not interpret itself as anything else than a working machine. There is no attempt to be anything else. One owner-like description often associated with trucks of this type sums it up perfectly. It doesn't feel like something you drive, it feels like something you operate until the job is done. That is the essence of the International Harvester A120 pickup. Mechanically, it was extremely honest. There is very little complexity compared to later generations of trucks. The drivetrain is straightforward, the engine options are designed for durability rather than performance, and maintenance is relatively direct for those familiar with industrial equipment. It was a truck built for environments where breakdowns were not acceptable and repair simplicity mattered more than refinement. Farmers, industrial workers, and utility crews appreciated exactly that. They didn't need elegance, they needed reliability under stress. But outside of that world, the A120 could feel intimidating. Not because it was aggressive in a modern sense, but because it was so uncompromising in its purpose. It looked like it belonged on a worksite permanently, not on everyday roads. It didn't visually invite casual driving, it demanded serious use. And that is the paradox of its legacy. Because today, when people look back at the International Harvester A120 pickup, they don't just see an old truck, they see a philosophy frozen in steel, a refusal to adapt to style trends, a commitment to function that ignored everything else. And while that made it less appealing in a changing market at the time, it also made it unforgettable decades later. It wasn't built to be admired, but it ended up being remembered exactly because of that.
The 1961 Ford F100 unibody represents one of the most unusual turning points in early 1960s pickup design because it was not simply a facelift or a trim change. It was a fundamental attempt to redefine how a pickup truck should be constructed. And that decision created a vehicle that feels, even today, slightly out of place in its own era. Instead of following the traditional formula, separate cab, separate bed, mounted on a ladder frame, Ford merged both elements into a single integrated body structure. The idea was to improve structural rigidity by eliminating flex between the cab and cargo bed. In engineering theory, this makes sense. Fewer joints can mean a stiffer body, more uniform stress distribution, and potentially improved durability under certain conditions. But what works in engineering logic does not always translate cleanly into market acceptance. Because the moment you look at the 1961 Ford F100 unibody, the first impression is not technical, it is psychological. It looks stretched. Not in a performance sense, but in a proportional sense, as if someone took a standard pickup and gently pulled the cab and bed together until the separation disappeared completely. The result is a continuous silhouette that feels smoother than traditional trucks, but also less defined. And that lack of definition is exactly what unsettled buyers. Pickup trucks in the early 1960s had a very strict visual language. The cab was one clearly readable volume. The bed was another. The gap between them was not just structural space, it was symbolic space. It communicated function. It told the observer, this is where people sit, and this is where work happens. Ford removed that visual separation entirely. And when a familiar structure disappears, the brain reacts immediately. Confusion, hesitation, doubt. The most common reaction to the unibody was not hostility, but a simple, repeated question: why does it look like that? That question became almost part of its identity. And in automotive history, that is rarely a good sign for sales success. The design itself was not careless. In fact, Ford was trying to move toward a more modern, integrated automotive aesthetic that was becoming popular across passenger cars. Smoother body lines, reduced visual fragmentation, and more unified forms were all emerging design trends of the era. The unibody was Ford's attempt to bring that philosophy into the pickup segment. But pickups are not passenger cars. They carry a different set of expectations. Compared with competitors from Ford Motor Company and General Motors, most trucks of the period still relied on traditional body-on-frame separation because it communicated strength in a way buyers instantly understood. Even if the unibody offered theoretical rigidity advantages, it had to compete against decades of visual conditioning. And that conditioning was powerful. Because truck buyers do not just buy performance, they buy trust in form. Mechanically, the 1961 Ford F100 unibody remained closely related to standard F-Series engineering. It used proven Ford drivetrains, reliable engines, and work-capable chassis components. In terms of hauling and towing, it was broadly comparable to conventional models of the time. So there was no obvious mechanical disadvantage that explained the market hesitation. The problem lived entirely in perception, and perception is often stronger than specification. One of the most interesting aspects of the unibody is how it alters proportional reading. Because the cab and bed are fused, the eye has no natural breakpoint to rest on. Instead, the truck is read as a single elongated volume. This creates a subtle visual tension, especially when compared to the clearly segmented silhouettes of traditional pickups. It doesn't look broken, it doesn't look weak, it simply looks unfamiliar. Inside the cabin, however, nothing radical was happening. The interior remained functional and straightforward, designed for work use rather than comfort experimentation. Controls were simple, materials were durable, and the layout was familiar to Ford truck buyers of the period. In that sense, the driver experience remained grounded in tradition, but the exterior was telling a completely different story. And that mismatch between familiar interior function and unusual exterior structure made the truck even harder to categorize. Was it still a traditional pickup or something transitioning into a new category? That uncertainty mattered more than Ford expected, because when buyers cannot immediately define what a vehicle is, they often choose to avoid it entirely. The 1961 Ford F100 unibody also highlights an important moment in Ford's design philosophy. It was a rare instance where the company prioritized structural experimentation over market familiarity. In hindsight, it can be seen as a transitional idea, an early exploration of integration that would later influence thinking about rigidity and body construction in broader automotive engineering. But timing is everything in automotive history. And this idea arrived before the market was ready to accept it. The truck's proportions remained its most defining trait: long, continuous, and uninterrupted. No visual separation between work and passenger zones. A single body that refused to divide itself into familiar parts. That made it innovative, but also difficult to accept. And over time, that difficulty defined its legacy. Because the 1961 Ford F100 unibody was not remembered for what it failed to do mechanically. It was remembered for how it challenged expectations about what a pickup should look like. And in automotive history, that kind of challenge is often what separates forgotten experiments from truly memorable ones, even if the market wasn't ready for it at the time.
The 1964 Ford F-350 Crew Cab stands at a very specific point in American truck history when manufacturers were no longer satisfied with simple utility, but were not yet refined enough in design language to scale trucks gracefully. What Ford created here was not a light expansion of an existing idea. It was a full-force enlargement of an already heavy-duty platform pushed into proportions that feel almost architectural in scale. This was not a small truck trying to become big. This was a big truck trying to become overwhelming. At its core, the crew cab version of the F-350 was built around a simple industrial need: transport more people without sacrificing payload capacity. Construction crews, utility departments, and industrial operators were no longer willing to rely on multiple vehicles for a single job site. Ford's answer was to extend the cab, stretch the frame, and preserve the heavy-duty backbone of the F-350 while adding a full second seating row. On paper, it solved a real-world logistical problem. In reality, it created one of the most visually exaggerated pickups of its time. The 1964 Ford F-350 Crew Cab looks like a machine that grew in stages rather than being designed as a single cohesive form. The cab is long and rectangular, expanded far beyond the proportions of a standard pickup. The body sits on a stretched chassis that seems almost reluctant to end, and the bed, instead of balancing the design, reinforces the feeling that the entire vehicle has been extended beyond its natural limit. There is a sense that every section of the truck is slightly too large for the section in front of it, and that accumulation of size creates a visual effect of weight, even when the truck is stationary. The proportions don't feel delicate or refined, they feel enforced. Compared with standard pickups from Ford Motor Company of the same era, the F-350 Crew Cab immediately breaks visual expectations. Where regular trucks still maintain a relatively balanced relationship between cab and bed, this version pushes the cab into dominance. The passenger compartment is no longer a compact space attached to a working bed. It becomes a central structural block in the overall design, and that changes how the entire vehicle is perceived. Instead of reading as a pickup truck with added seating, it begins to read like a transport platform that happens to include a cargo bed. That subtle shift in perception is important because in the early 1960s, pickup identity was still tightly defined. Trucks were expected to look functional, direct, and relatively compact in their structural logic. Even heavy-duty models maintained a certain visual discipline. The F-350 Crew Cab abandons that restraint entirely in favor of maximum utility. And that is where the overbuilt impression comes from, not because it is poorly designed, but because it is visually uncompromising. The cab extension is the most striking feature. Instead of a simple addition, it fundamentally reshapes the silhouette. The truck no longer has a short, efficient profile. It becomes elongated with a cabin that dominates the midsection of the vehicle. This shifts visual weight toward the center and rear, creating a stretched, almost unbalanced reading from certain angles. Yet mechanically, this was not an experiment in fragility. The 1964 Ford F-350 Crew Cab was built on Ford's heavy-duty ladder frame architecture, designed for maximum load-bearing strength. The suspension system relied on robust leaf spring setups capable of handling commercial payloads. Engine options were tuned for torque delivery rather than speed, ensuring that the truck could perform consistently under demanding work conditions. In other words, underneath the exaggerated proportions was a genuinely serious work platform. But seriousness in engineering does not always translate to elegance in appearance, and this truck is a perfect example of that divide. Inside the cab, the expansion created real functional benefits. The additional seating row allowed entire crews to travel together, which significantly increased efficiency for industries that previously depended on multiple vehicles. Workers, tools, and equipment could now be transported in a single coordinated trip. This was a major operational advantage. However, comfort remained strictly secondary. The interior design followed utilitarian principles: durable materials, simple layouts, and controls designed for longevity rather than refinement. Everything about it reinforced function over comfort. On the road, the driving experience reflected the scale of the machine. The long wheelbase improved stability under load, especially when the truck was fully occupied or carrying equipment. But it also introduced practical limitations in everyday maneuvering. Turning required space and planning. Urban driving became a careful exercise in positioning rather than instinctive movement. This was not a nimble vehicle. It was a controlled, heavy system, and it behaved exactly like one. The most interesting aspect of the 1964 Ford F-350 crew cab is how its size communicates intent. Even when empty, it appears committed to carrying something important. Its visual mass suggests responsibility, as if the truck is always prepared for a demanding task regardless of actual load. That psychological effect is part of what makes it so memorable, because modern trucks often balance size with visual refinement, but here there is no attempt to reduce perception of mass. The mass itself becomes the design language. Compared with competitors from General Motors, early crew cab implementations were still in their formative stages, and none had yet fully refined the relationship between proportion, comfort, and visual balance. The Ford approach prioritizes capacity first, refinement second, and styling last, and that ordering is visible in every line of the truck. In hindsight, the 1964 Ford F-350 crew cab represents an important evolutionary step in heavy-duty vehicle design. It shows the moment when trucks began transitioning from individual operator machines into group transport platforms capable of handling both people and industrial workloads simultaneously. But it also shows the cost of early scaling. Proportion takes a back seat when function leads everything. And that is why it feels so unusual today, because it doesn't look like a carefully balanced design. It looks like a machine that kept growing until it simply had to stop.
The 1967 Dodge D200 crew cab is one of those rare trucks where the design doesn't feel like it was shaped by styling decisions at all. It feels like it was shaped entirely by necessity and then left that way without any attempt to refine the visual outcome afterward. What you get is a machine that is brutally functional, visually heavy, and almost stubborn in how it presents itself to the world. This was Dodge responding to a very practical demand in the mid-1960s. Work crews were getting larger, job sites were getting more complex, and transporting people separately from tools was becoming inefficient. The crew cab concept was the solution, but instead of redesigning the truck from scratch, Dodge essentially extended its existing heavy-duty platform into something longer, heavier, and far more visually dominant. And the result is immediately striking. The 1967 Dodge D200 crew cab looks less like a carefully proportioned vehicle and more like a modular construction that was extended until it reached functional limits. The cab is expanded into a full rectangular passenger compartment with little visual tapering. The doors are large and flat, the roofline is straight and uncompromising. Then, without any real transition, the frame continues into a standard cargo bed that feels like a separate block attached behind it. There is almost no visual rhythm between sections. Everything is straight, square, and continuous, and that creates a very specific impression. This is not a vehicle designed to look balanced. This is a vehicle designed to do a job regardless of how it looks. That is where the brick with doors reputation comes from, because the proportions don't just feel large, they feel dense. The cab doesn't sit lightly on the chassis, it sits like a structure placed on top of another structure. The bed doesn't feel integrated into a flowing design, it feels like a functional extension added after the fact. Even the wheelbase, stretched to accommodate the crew configuration, contributes to this sense of elongated heaviness. From any angle, the truck communicates mass before anything else. Compared to standard pickups from Dodge at the time, the D200 crew cab immediately breaks the expected visual formula. Where regular trucks still maintain a clear relationship between cab and bed proportions, this version prioritizes interior space so aggressively that the cab becomes the dominant visual element. The bed no longer defines the silhouette. the interior compartment does, and that changes how the entire vehicle is perceived. Instead of reading as a pickup with extra seating, it begins to read as a people carrier that happens to have a cargo function attached to it. That subtle shift in identity is what makes early crew cab designs so visually confusing, because the eye expects separation of purpose, and this truck removes it almost completely. Mechanically, however, the 1967 Dodge D200 crew cab is very straightforward. It sits on a heavy-duty ladder frame designed for load-bearing stress, with suspension systems built around durability rather than comfort. Leaf springs, solid construction, and torque-oriented engine options define its behavior more than anything else. It is engineered to survive workload cycles, not to provide refined driving dynamics. That means everything about its movement feels deliberate. Acceleration is not quick, steering is not light, braking is not sharp. Instead, everything happens with a sense of controlled weight, as if the truck is always aware of its own mass and acts accordingly. Inside the cab, the expanded space is where the crew cab concept truly justifies itself. For industrial users, the ability to transport multiple workers in a single vehicle was a major efficiency improvement. Instead of coordinating several trucks, entire teams could now move together with equipment in the same platform. That might sound normal today, but in the 1960s, it was a genuine logistical shift. However, comfort still remains secondary. The interior is simple and functional. Seats are durable but basic. Materials are chosen for resistance rather than luxury, and controls are laid out for practicality and maintenance access rather than design elegance. There is no attempt to hide the fact that this is a working machine. Everything is exposed in its purpose. Everything is direct, and that reinforces the industrial identity of the truck even further. On the road, the experience reflects the same philosophy. The long wheelbase improves stability when the truck is loaded, especially on highways or uneven terrain, but it also creates clear limitations in everyday maneuverability. Turning requires space, parking requires planning, tight environments demand patience rather than instinct. It is not a truck that adapts quickly to urban conditions. It is a truck that expects space to be available, and that expectation defines its personality more than any styling detail. The most interesting thing about the 1967 Dodge D200 crew cab is how visually honest it is. There are no illusions in its design, no attempt to reduce perceived size, no effort to hide its mechanical seriousness. What you see is exactly what it is, a large-scale utility platform built to move people and equipment together under demanding conditions. That honesty, however, comes at a visual cost, because when everything is scaled for function without proportional refinement, the result naturally feels exaggerated. Even when parked, the truck gives the impression of movement under workload. Even when empty, it feels like it is carrying responsibility. And that perception is what makes it so memorable today. In modern automotive design, trucks are carefully balanced between utility and styling. Designers soften proportions, adjust visual mass, and integrate features to avoid overwhelming the viewer. But the 1967 crew cab belongs to a time before that balance became standard practice. So instead of refinement, you get expansion. Instead of elegance, you get volume. Instead of visual harmony, you get raw function expressed directly in metal. And that is why the 1967 Dodge D200 crew cab still stands out so strongly in automotive history. Not because it failed to achieve its purpose, but because it achieved it so directly that the design itself became impossible to ignore.
The 1971 Ford F-350 Super Camper Special sits in that strange category of American truck engineering where practicality, ambition, and visual absurdity all collide in one very specific shape. It was not built to be stylish. It was not built to be subtle. It was built for one purpose only: carrying the biggest slide-in campers Ford could accommodate without the entire truck collapsing under its own expectations.
And that singular mission shaped everything about it. At its core, Ford took the heavy-duty F-350 platform from Ford Motor Company and stretched and reinforced it specifically for rear-heavy camper loads. These weren't small camping units. They were large, fully equipped living spaces that could turn a pickup into a mobile cabin. And once you place that much weight behind the rear axle, the entire geometry of the truck has to change. So Ford changed it, aggressively. The result is the 1971 Ford F-350 Super Camper Special, a truck that looks like it has been physically extended at the rear just to solve a balance problem that normal pickups couldn't handle, and visually it shows. The most immediate feature is the extreme rear overhang. The frame extends far beyond what you would expect from a standard pickup, creating a long tail section that feels almost disconnected from the cab. The bed itself is not just a cargo space anymore. It becomes a structural platform designed specifically to support the weight of a camper unit sitting high above the axle line. And that changes the entire visual language of the truck. Instead of a balanced front-to-rear proportion, you get a machine that feels front-loaded, with most of its mass visually concentrated in the cab and chassis, while the rear stretches outward like an engineered afterthought that somehow became the defining feature. And that is where the pulled apart in the middle impression comes from, because the truck doesn't look naturally proportioned, it looks extended, as if the original F-350 was physically lengthened just to solve a very specific camping problem, and then never visually corrected afterward. From the side profile, the effect is even stronger. The wheelbase is long, but the rear overhang extends beyond what most trucks of the era would consider normal structural balance. The camper mounting points sit above a reinforced bed structure designed to distribute weight, but visually they create a towering mass at the back that dominates the silhouette when a camper is installed. Even without a camper, the truck carries a sense of intended load that is hard to ignore. Compared with standard heavy-duty pickups from Ford Motor Company or competitors at General Motors, the Super Camper Special immediately stands out not because it is radically different in concept, but because it exaggerates one specific use case to the extreme. Most trucks are designed for flexibility, cargo, towing, general work. This one is designed for a very specific kind of weight distribution problem, and that focus reshapes everything. Mechanically, the 1971 Ford F-350 Super Camper Special is very serious hardware. The suspension is heavily reinforced to handle constant rear load stress. The frame is strengthened to resist flex under camper weight. The axle setup is tuned for stability rather than agility, ensuring that when a large camper is mounted, the truck remains controllable at highway speeds. But engineering strength does not erase physical reality. And the physical reality is that most of the mass is no longer centered in a typical pickup balance zone. It is pushed rearward, which affects everything from handling to appearance. On the road, the driving experience reflects that design decision clearly. With a camper installed, the truck feels stable but heavily committed. Lane changes are deliberate, braking requires anticipation, cornering becomes a study in weight management rather than responsiveness. Without a camper, the truck still feels slightly waiting for its purpose, as if its entire design assumes that a large structure should be sitting in the bed. That psychological effect is unusual, because most trucks feel neutral when empty. This one feels incomplete. Inside, the cab remains typical early 1970s Ford heavy-duty simplicity. Functional seating, straightforward controls, and durable materials define the environment. The focus is not comfort innovation, but endurance. Drivers who used these trucks often spent long highway hours towing or transporting campers, so reliability mattered more than refinement. The interior does not try to match the visual drama of the exterior. It stays practical, almost restrained, which makes the outside proportions even more dramatic by contrast.
And that contrast is part of its identity, because the 1971 Ford F-350 Super Camper Special is not just a pickup with modifications, it's a pickup that has been structurally re-aimed towards a single use case so strongly that its proportions no longer feel general purpose. It is focused, it is specialized, and visually it is completely unapologetic about it. That combination, engineering logic pushed to the edge of visual balance, is what gives it its goofy genius reputation today.
The 1982 GMC Caballero sits in a very specific corner of automotive history, where manufacturers were no longer asking how strong should a truck be, but instead asking a much more complicated question: how much like a car can a truck become before it stops being a truck at all? And the Caballero is what happens when that question is answered halfway. Built by General Motors on a mid-size passenger car platform, the Caballero was GMC's take on the growing personal pickup trend of the late 1970s and early 1980s. Buyers wanted comfort, styling, and everyday usability, but still wanted the idea of a bed, a lifestyle, a sense of utility. So manufacturers started grafting pickup beds onto car-like bodies, hoping to satisfy both worlds. The result, in this case, is a vehicle that looks almost confident from a distance and slightly uncertain up close. At the front, the 1982 GMC Caballero behaves like a coupe or personal luxury car. The nose is clean, the proportions are low and relatively sleek, and the body lines flow in a way that feels more road cruiser than work machine. It gives the impression that you are looking at something designed for comfort first, identity second, and utility third. But then the eye moves backward, and the entire concept begins to split. Because instead of a fully integrated pickup design, the Caballero essentially transitions from passenger car body language into a clearly defined cargo bed. The bed is functional, square, and honest, but it sits behind a body that was never originally designed to visually support that kind of separation. And that mismatch is where the tension begins. The 1982 GMC Caballero does not look dramatically wrong. It looks slightly misaligned in identity, as if two different design philosophies were forced to share the same chassis and agreed to compromise without fully blending. Half of it wants to be a stylish personal coupe, the other half wants to be a practical hauling tool, and neither side fully wins. This is why people often describe it as half cool, half confused. From a structural perspective, the Caballero is based on a unibody-style car platform adapted to support a pickup bed. This is fundamentally different from traditional body-on-frame trucks from Ford Motor Company or Dodge, where the bed and cab are mounted on a separate ladder frame designed for heavy-duty stress. Instead, the Caballero behaves more like a passenger car that has been extended and reinforced in the rear section. This gives it a very noticeable advantage in everyday driving. The ride is smoother, the steering feels lighter, and road behavior is closer to a mid-size car than a commercial pickup. On paved roads, especially in urban environments, it feels more refined than traditional trucks of its era. But that refinement comes with structural trade-offs. The cargo bed is capable, but not extreme. Payload capacity is limited compared to full-size pickups, and the suspension is tuned more for comfort than heavy industrial use. It can carry equipment, furniture, or light cargo without issue, but it was never designed to compete with serious work trucks. So it lives in a middle category that is hard to define. Not a pure workhorse, not a pure passenger car, something in between. And that in-between nature is exactly what shaped its visual identity. From the side profile, the Caballero has a long, flowing roofline that transitions into a relatively clean bed section. The problem is not that the design is bad, it is that the visual language of the front half does not fully match the language of the rear half. The cab feels soft and car-like, while the bed feels sharp and utilitarian. The transition is smooth physically, but psychologically it feels like a shift in purpose. And the human eye notices that immediately, because we are used to clear categories: car, truck, SUV, each with its own visual expectations. The Caballero sits in the overlap zone where those expectations blur. Inside, the 1982 GMC Caballero leans strongly toward passenger comfort. The cabin is more refined than traditional pickups of the early 1980s, with improved seating comfort, better sound insulation, and a driving position that feels closer to a personal vehicle than a commercial tool. The interior was clearly designed for daily use rather than job site abuse. This is where the concept actually makes sense, a vehicle you can live with every day. But again, the exterior immediately reminds you that it is also supposed to be a pickup. And that duality never fully disappears. Mechanically, the Caballero shares much of its foundation with General Motors' mid-size car architecture of the era. This results in predictable handling, decent fuel efficiency for its time, and a generally more relaxed driving character compared to heavier trucks from Ford and Dodge. But it also means it doesn't deliver the same sense of rugged capability that traditional pickup buyers expected. And that gap between expectation and reality is where the identity problem lives. Because truck buyers are not just buying transportation, they're buying confidence in capability. They want to know that the vehicle can take punishment, carry weight, and survive work environments without hesitation. The Caballero does some of that, but not all of it. And that not all is what defines its reputation. Yet, ironically, that uncertainty is also what keeps it interesting today. The 1982 GMC Caballero is not remembered as a failure of engineering. It is remembered as a design compromise made visible. You can literally see the negotiation between comfort and utility in its shape. You can see where the car ends and where the truck begins, even if the manufacturer tried to blend them together. It's stylish enough to attract attention, practical enough to justify existence, but never fully committed to either identity. And that's why it stands out in hindsight. Because in automotive history, the most memorable machines are not always the ones that are most successful. Sometimes they're the ones that tried to be two things at once and revealed just how hard that balance really is.